Right. Do, do, do. Is this the mic that's too loud and echoey? Yep. Is this mic better? Yes, it is. Marilyn, good to see you. How are you? You look so well. It's crazy. Kanena Horrors, that's right. Just because some people are asking about the plans and who is where and what is who today, I'll let you know that we have a couple of switches. I am here instead of Rabbi Alexander, who has a bit of a cold. And because I can make this time but not the 11, wonderful Rabbi Mark Goodman has switched with me. So he is going to be here at 11. So apologies if some people came just for him or are going to miss him if they're leaving in an hour. But this was the only way we could pull it off at short notice because we didn't work this out till last night that Rabbi Alexander wasn't going to feel up to teaching today. So it's wonderful that we're able to be here and do what we can. And also both our estimable Susie and Rosie both also have the cold that is going around. So thank you to all the people who stepped up and put out cookies, and we will try our best. They assure me they're watching on the live feed. So we love you, Susie, Rosie, and anyone else out there watching from somewhere else. And I'm looking at the live feed now to see if they're here. Whoop. So yeah, I will be replacing Rabbi Alexander, and then you'll have the good male rabbi at 11 with a break. So, as I'm Rabbi Jess, or Jessica Yarkin, my undergrad students like calling me Rabbi Jess. So it's kind of the Jessica has fallen out of favor. So, so I've now become Jess. But it's still me, same old, same old. And it's just very ironic that I had been planning to teach this for a while, knowing that just 'tis the season to have a cold, to have the lurgy, to feel a bit under the weather. It's still peak winter, a lot of cruds are going around, because this is going to be a session about self-care as a fundamental spiritual practice, something I think that Judaism actually has a lot of very worthwhile stuff to talk about. And we're also going to talk about the insanely hard task of achieving wellness. And we'll define what we mean by wellness. So that's what we're going to do today. Boop. Just as a check-in, really, how are you all doing today on a scale of these dogs? If you could just have a look at the different dogs. Some of them are smiling, frowning, kind of a bit goofy. One of them looks a bit asleep. One of them is just amazed and surprised. We've got some dog number 5s. Any other dog numbers? We've got a number 1. Oh yeah, definitely. That's a cold dog. That's a dog that needs some snuggles, but definitely looks alert and ready to enjoy MID. I think dog 1 is definitely enjoying MID. Can everyone see the screen okay? Whoop.
I love that, by the way. Even if you were feeling crappy, that changes.
Dog number 3, again, I'll show this at the end of class, you're welcome to take a closer look, is actually very angry and scowling. So, yeah, I definitely feel in the morning like I'm more of a dog number 5. But yeah, when wonderful things happen to me, I get more into a dog number 4 kind of mood. Lana. Yes, yep. There are definitely a couple of dogs that are just on the edge. They're just on the edge. Yep. Yes, number 9 looks like he's just waking up. He's just... remind me what you had said. That was so long ago. hanging in there. That you're right. Thank you so much. For those at home, I will make sure to repeat the short things because it's not worth passing a mic for a quick quip. But yeah, I'll make sure that everyone can hear at the back and virtually. But there you go. We all come into the room in various states of wellness, well-being, different emotionalities, and we are all very vulnerable to change. So our mood right now will probably be different just by the end of class, just when you finished a biscuit or a cookie, so I'm just translating American to English there. Or if you needed a bit more water or coffee, just that can affect your mood, as you know. And then again, if you speak to a friend or get blown away by some ancient Jewish wisdom and then suddenly feel such a sense of pride or inspiration, or your mood could deteriorate. You could feel more and more tired and crabby and, blossom into dog number 3, the most mean of the dogs, I think. What I say could really annoy you. And you could be missing your own bed. Or the lurgy could be slowly creeping up into your throat, and you could just start to feel physically quite ill. But we've been throwing around some terms, and I want us to get a bit more on the same page as to some of these terms that we're going to use today. Because the first one is health, right? And again, this I found at least very useful, because a lot of us could say, just to go back to the dogs, but I can't be dog number 6 because I'm in pain, because I have a lot of health conditions. How do you expect me to show up happy, carefree when I'm burdened? And to that I would say, Jewish wisdom. Let's have a look. Health. Health is the passive state of a person's mental and or physical condition. That's what's very important about health, actually. It is something you would write down. Good or bad, health conditions can be tracked on medical charts. There is a diagnosis. Whether they can be changed or not, that's up to you and a physician or a mental health care professional. But health conditions are things that we definitely didn't ask for. We often have very limited control over. Sometimes, again, if you never went out and interacted with people, it would be less likely that you would catch a cold, but it's also unreasonable to ask you to do that. There's no moral judgment. Yes, we can actively have an effect on our health by living certain lifestyles. Of course, we can have good health or bad health, which is directly, of course, going to change based on how we're treating our bodies. But at any given moment, your health, it just is this passive state. And I'm sure all of us could list 1 to 6 medical conditions we currently have. Chronic conditions, low thyroid, some stuff going on with our hearts, hearing, sight. You either have, every organ is on a spectrum from failing or even failed to really, really working peak condition. And every human being, even little kids, have a variety of good and bad healths. But health is what it is, and you can't really fix it in a day, in an hour, in a moment. Obviously, you can with drugs and extended treatment. But it's a passive state. It's just your health. It's kind of real, it's tangible, it's chartable, etc. Did anyone just want to have a quick question or comment before we move on to wellness, which is a different and bigger category? Gary, did you have a thought?
I just want to say that our daughter's a physician and she takes care of people inside the hospital in Atlanta, Georgia.
I will, after he said it, I will write it out. I need to listen to it first so I can hear it.
And she says that even with genetic conditions, in most cases, if they took good control of their lifestyle,
Sure.
it would not be affecting them to the degree that they were in the hospital.
Beautiful. So Gary is talking about his daughter, who is a physician, who works in a hospital. and says that even people with genetic conditions, with grievous, big, major conditions, if they live a certain lifestyle, it can alter their diagnosis and prognosis. You think about someone who maybe is like a celiac. If there are certain foods that they avoid, they will be okay, relatively speaking. They won't be in pain. They can function much better than, or a diabetic, than if they ignored what their body needs to feel well. Well, let's talk about wellness. This is an active process as opposed to a passive state. It is an active process in which we become aware of and make choices towards a happy and purposeful life, fulfilling work and play, meaningful relationships, and a positive living environment. And by the way, these are all different theories in some cases. It's okay if you have a different concept of wellness or health, but for the purposes of this discussion and of Jewish values, I thought it would be very interesting to kind of break these down and hold them almost as coexisting, influencing each other, but not necessarily related, but you can see they probably are going to affect one another. But what we're saying is that wellness isn't a physical condition or even a mental one, although it's definitely going to show up mentally. I would go and use the word spiritual, I think, because it's almost intangible. It's in the realm of feelings, emotions, and also it's linked to our bodies as well. But we'll work out a little bit more about what we mean by wellness and how it could be possible to achieve wellness, irregardless of health. And then just another word that it's important, and we'll talk about the opposite as well, is thriving. Thriving or flourishing. And that, again, isn't a physical thing. We're not talking thriving equals good health. If my legs work, I wouldn't say, my legs are flourishing today, And again, if my eyesight was 20/20, I wouldn't say, my eyes are thriving, because that's not the language of physical wellness, is it? Flourishing, thriving, that's attitude, that's purpose, that's in the realm of emotions, feelings, psychological conditions. So thriving, really, I think is going to be linked to wellness. It's going to be the product of achieving wellness. And health isn't really to do it with thriving, although it's often a precondition. So the opposite of thriving would be, would anyone like to take a stab at what you would say the opposite of thriving would be? Down in the dumps. Perfect. Because that's very emotional. I love that. Any other synonyms? Down in the dumps, please.
Thriving must mean I can pay my rent, I have food in the refrigerator, I have heat in my home, and I have a roof over my head.
Right.
You're thriving.
Beautiful.
More than many people.
Great. So I love what we just heard, which is thriving. And again, this is not about your physical body, but you would have food in the fridge. You would have a roof over your head. You would have internet access. You would have those kind of things, and you could consider yourself thriving. I would use the opposite of the word thriving, because it can often help with definitions to think, well, what is the opposite? Languishing, right? Failure to thrive. Again, down in the dumps, Zissel perfectly encapsulated the emotions of it. Here's where this is helpful. We can plot a chart. We're going to look at the differences between health versus wellness. This was really helpful to me because one of my jobs is pastoral care. And I'm not a physician, so I have no business curing or helping other people with any physical ailments. But as a rabbi, as a spiritual leader, a lot of my students and a lot of my congregants, when I was a congregational rabbi, would come to me feeling down in the dumps. Depressed, purposeless, despairing, stressed, anxious. And there's a difference between those feelings and an underlying mental health condition. That's something that is passive, probably stable, and diagnosable, and something I cannot help you with. So I'll tell you what I mean by that. If an individual has manic depression, bipolar, has autism, has any kind of big mental health condition, schizophrenia, there is nothing I can do or say, and nothing that I should do or say to change that. That person belongs with someone who is a psychiatrist who can prescribe drugs, or a therapist, some kind of healer, or again, they can say, no, this is who I am, even something like ADHD. These are, just different mental health conditions, and that is something that an individual will contend with for their life. Most of these things they can go away. You can have depression, anxiety for some months or years. Or it can be lifelong, there's bouts, etc. But if it's clinical, it's part of the health realm, and you wouldn't go to a rabbi necessarily. You might just for comfort and recognition and to be heard. And that is where the wellness part of it comes in. Because when there are emotions and feelings, when someone is feeling sad because something external happened, so for example, someone died, or someone got sick, or someone is going through a breakup or a divorce, or is really troubled because a family member made some really bad choices, or someone is afraid, or someone is lonely or isolated, all of those negative emotions, there isn't a pill for that. I mean, you could use certain recreational drugs to numb those feelings, but that person would be languishing, not thriving. And the opposite of that would be that they were flourishing, that they had high mental health in that moment. And if someone is joyful or happy, they have a simcha, they're successful, they're feeling really proud of themselves. And again, we've all been there. That individual in that moment would show up to me, to a rabbi, to a friend, to anyone, in a condition of, yay, optimism, well-being, and woohooness, like it's just delightful. We all, as you can tell, experience this line, this axis. I think it's called is it called the XY axis? Or is that the AB axis? The XY axis, great, I'm not great at math. Beautiful. So yes, this up and down one, the vertical one, we could even think now, where are you on that axis? Are you kind of a little bit low? Are you missing people? Are you struggling? Are you a bit lonely, cold, all of those things? Or are you actually doing fairly okay? You had some good conversations, you felt connected to friends, community, family. You had a great steak last night, like, there are just moments that you can hover, like I said, even during the day. Then you take a look at the other line, our horizontal line. That would be in the health category, but we're talking mental health. So you could have low mental health or persistent and high mental health. And actually we'll use the word illness. So low mental illness, just meaning that you don't have many conditions. And again, they can be developed, but you just could have quite a neurotypical brain, not suffering from a bout of depression or anxiety or existential dread or anything. Or again, you could be very, very, very much in the grips of a mental health episode or meltdown. And again, that's something that's clinical and it's different, and a lot of these are chronic. And this also could be a physical health line. What I'm trying to get at, and what I think it's just really helpful for us to see, And this is where we're going to then learn some Jewish texts, because you're telling me, why, Rabbi Yarkin, are you even saying this stuff? This is very psychology right now. But I think it's quite obvious that it's possible to be thriving, really high thriving, but actually with poor health. You could have a broken leg and not be able to walk, but you could have a sunny disposition. You could be in a place of gratitude, happiness, playing your best game of mahjong, feeling connected. And at the same time, you could also have absolutely nothing physically wrong, no pre-existing conditions, but you could be languishing, spiraling. You could be, and again, some of it is mindset, it's negative, or it's environmental. A lot of it isn't even your fault. There isn't blame here. This isn't a pull yourself together. It's very hard to flourish when you're in pain. It's very hard to flourish. No one is going to say, pull yourself up by the bootstraps when you're going through something very real. So this isn't about, don't be a crybaby. It's just a realistic portrayal of how different individuals can still be able to thrive, flourish, or at least not languish when they have a variety of physical issues. And again, mental issues are still physical because they're in the brain and they are chemical. There are often just different neurons and synapses firing in different ways, overactive or underactive. So mental health really is still physical as well. But the wellness axis, that is attitudinal. It's a feeling, it's emotional. Are people kind of getting this, thinking, yep, I'll kind of go along with this for now at least? Is there anyone that I think you wanted to have a comment or a question, please?
There's two comments. Number one, I looked it up because I knew that XY was wrong. So the X is the horizontal, Y is the...
Beautiful.
But that's not what I just wanted to correct.
Sure.
There is a difference, like for example, during COVID, after October 7th,
Yes.
I mean, I know for myself, I have periods of isolation, depression, but somebody said it to me, and it really meant a lot to me. They said, you're a very sensitive person. Of course there is a reason why you are feeling this way. There's a difference between free-floating anxiety
Yes.
and there being a reason for you to be upset.
Yes.
And I think that makes all the difference in being able to tackle it.
Beautiful. I'll kind of summarize that because that's such a powerful point. First of all, there are some people who are more sensitive to news, to not even news, to big things that happen that can weigh heavily on the spirit, so that you could naturally not be someone who just is a depressed person, but something can happen to you that will cause you to become depressed. It will at some point be managed and mediated, but I think on a bigger, realer picture, a lot of us who were thriving on October 6th, 2023, languished, even worse than languished, despaired, felt horrified and sickened in a very real way for months and years after October 7th. I know I did. I cried almost every day for months, and I think a lot of us did to an extent. It's a spectrum, and some of us can tune out these kind of horrors. And again, this is just an example. So I think a lot of us have had moments, whether it's a personal tragedy of a family member or of yourself, or of a world event, or of a Jewish people event that has hit you, or COVID that took away our ability to socialize for over a year and isolated us and made some of us ill with long COVID, and people died of COVID. That, I think, was a global languishing. And a lot of us who could have had low mental health conditions crept up on the axis. And again, these are not static lines. That's why it isn't just either X or Y. It's not one or the other. That even within a day, we can go do, 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 do. But I think that's the thing, that this line, and again, I've completely forgotten again if it's X or Y. This is X. Beautiful. So our X line, that is probably going to be fairly stable. Again, if you have dyslexia, for example, that is going to stay with you. There are coping mechanisms, but it's part of who you are. It's part of your brain's makeup. If you have a photographic memory, that's also something you will always have. If you then have Alzheimer's, that will again be something that will creep in, and you'll go higher on your mental illness line. But a lot of us will be pretty stable for months and years on this line. The flourishing and languishing is incredibly dependent on our environment, on our response to what's happening around us, and our self-talk, and our ability to self-care and support system. So we can suddenly all be plummeted to languishing, or elevated, with incredible news, with victories, with wonderful things happening, to thriving. Yeshua ben Sirah, the wisdom of Ben Sirah. I've got scattered throughout this presentation, which, by the way, is a two-parter, because I'll be back on February the 4th, and there's a lot to talk about. So this just, we'll be dwelling here for a while. And this will give the chance for the people who are sick to get well. So that's going to be great. But the wisdom of Ben Sirah, 175 BCE, wrote the following: "Do not give yourself over to sorrow or distress yourself deliberately." Notice the very deliberate use of the word deliberately. "A merry heart keeps a person alive, and joy lengthens one's days." What do we make of this? Interesting, yeah, Zissel just beautifully summarized it. This is making the theory, if you are happy, you can live longer, or you will live long even. It's quite strong in its language. Please.
Well, to me, interpreting that as the idea of mind over matter, that you can control how you feel by using your brain and your abilities to kind of think of the big picture.
Yes. Gorgeous. We have the mind over matter. Mind over matter, the ability that we can manipulate, change, or alter what is physically there because of that power of our mental capacity. And again, you are not going to wish yourself healthy. Again, we'll go back to the broken leg, because it happened, the bones need to mend, and maybe they'll never mend quite the same. You cannot suddenly wish the bone fixed. We know that. I'm not saying for a second that we have magical powers. But let me tell you about my two grandparents. I had Grandpa Mark, who literally did have a broken leg in his early 90s. And again, it happens. However, he chose to never get better. It was hard. He resisted his physical therapy. He found it, and again, I do not blame him for this. He was an elderly gentleman, a hero of World War II. But for him, it was too much, and he languished, and he never walked again. So it was very strange, because his physician said, if he does his exercises, he will be capable of walking again. It's a fixable, simple fracture. And yet, when I visited him 6 months later, he was in his wheelchair. 6 months after that, he was bedridden. And he just kind of gave up. And the nurses and doctors, they didn't say it's a choice, because I don't think it feels like a choice when you're just very worn out. And he was not a sad man either. He had children and grandchildren and a happy a life. He was just spent. It was a mental thing. And he just couldn't quite fathom that. And this was when he was in his early 90s, and he passed away a little bit, like another year after that, but lost the ability to walk for a few years before he died. My grandma, currently still alive, 101 years old. She broke her leg when she was 96. And the doctors actually said to her, "This may finish you off." And she was just like, "Are you kidding me? Show me the paper. Show me what exercises to do." And she did every single exercise, every single little trick. It was through just willpower alone that she would then walk to the bus stop 6 months later. And rather than getting more and more severely paralyzed, with the wheelchair and then the bed, she went from wheelchair to Zimmer frame, walking frame, to walking stick, to unaided. It's unheard of. And she's thriving at 101 years old. There's a lot wrong with her. Physically, she could list her health conditions. But it really showed me that the ability to kind of go to a spiritual place with it, to find some kind of inner strength, that it's almost irregardless of your physical condition. And I think a lot of us can relate to both of those, and we've seen it with our friends and family and with ourselves. And again, there's no shame, there's no blame. It's a horrible thing to happen whenever you get injured, or whenever someone you love gets injured. And again, we're not saying here, don't feel sorrow or distress. It's a natural, human, empathetic response to to October 7th, or to any human tragedy or despicable act, especially when we're related and connected and when it's our family. That's what community means. Even if we don't personally suddenly become threatened or attacked, we feel and we cry and we weep for others. But we didn't choose that. We didn't just say, "I am going to feel despair today." And by the way, if you are clinically depressed, that's also not a choice. You can't help but feel incredibly down. And I've unfortunately worked with several students who have felt incredibly depressed and have even self-harmed. They've self-harmed. They've hurt their bodies more when there was nothing wrong with them physically, because their mental anguish was too much for them to bear. They felt they had to release it somehow, act out the pain, or show other people, "Here is my pain." Because a lot of mental health challenges, they are by their nature invisible, and it's hard to know when someone else is even suffering or struggling. We're not saying that those struggles don't exist, that they're not real. But what is a very Jewish value, and this was Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, was that we are a people of joy. We don't sit and mope. We grieve, we express, we feel, but we always turn towards that. Let's get back to gratitude. And gratitude is this, and again, that's a slide later on, an incredibly spiritual practice of saying, even with my conditions, even with the brokenness of the world, I'm grateful to be alive. I'm grateful for what does work. And it's so hard, and it's harder and harder every day. And as we grow older and we are less physically able, and as our parents die, and even our siblings die, our friends can die, our partners can die, it is the bravest act of courage in the world to still be grateful. It's incredible. But a merry heart keeps a person alive, and joy can lengthen one's days, and that's over 2,000 years old. So let's kind of go a little bit more into other practical ways that we can achieve wellness. Because it's all very well and good. Like, we've got this. All of you are incredibly intelligent humans. That's why you chose to take MID week after week. And I know a lot of you, you've asked brilliant questions. You've given me amazing insights. So you knew this. Like, we almost wasted too much time on me saying, just be well. But let's have a look at how hard it actually is and strategies that can help us achieve that flourishing even if and when we have other bad conditions. So let's talk about the importance of self-love. And this is Shira Small, Jewish Women's Archive from before COVID, but fairly recent. And I love using female sources when I teach and modern sources. We just saw some ancient Jewish wisdom. This is just a modern reflection. And again, unsurprising. Love your neighbor as yourself. Hands up if you've ever heard that before. Have you ever heard? It's so boring. I've heard it too many times. I've seen it on shul windows. Really, Rabbi Jess, you're going to go there? Yes, I am, because Shira Small sees this. Love your neighbor as you love yourself provides the Jewish people with this inspirational and often repeated Torah verse that seems to pop up in my own life endlessly. For a long time, I appreciated it and used it as a motivation to do good. But then I reached a point in my life when treating others as I treated myself wouldn't have been the kindest path. I realized something crucial about the verse, love your neighbor as you love yourself, which had escaped me before. That verse is as much about self-care as it is about caring for others. I couldn't expect to treat others nicely when I wasn't affording myself any love. If the Torah is imploring us to be kind through this verse, which I believe it is, well, the first step is loving ourselves. I saw a bunch of kind of nods and like recognitions. Does anyone want to just share what they're thinking? Joelle. Joette.
I think that when it was originally written, it was just assumed that people loved themselves or felt good about themselves.
Right.
And I think we are much more aware now that that is not always the case.
Nailed it, Joette. Thank you. In ancient times, the self was an alien concept. There was no such thing as an autobiography until really much more modern times, like the Middle Ages is the first one in England, because individuality wasn't a thing. It wasn't a social norm. It was all about tribal identity. So you did not have the luxury to think, do I like myself? When you're just trying to survive and fight wars, and infant mortality is incredibly high. It's something that I think the Enlightenment age affords us. And I'm sure there were people that felt like failures when, thousands of years ago. And we see in the Torah, we see some individuals who feel like they don't love themselves. King Saul comes to mind, who again has been diagnosed, again, it's inappropriate to do that because we never met him, but who definitely seems to have depression and mania, and makes bad decisions and says, woe is me, a lot. But yeah, on the whole, self-love is something that's more modern. So when the Torah talks about love your neighbor as you love yourself, the Torah assumes self-love. Of course, everyone loves themselves. Everyone's working correctly. But yes, in this age, it isn't a given. And I think it felt quite true that we don't treat ourselves very nicely. And that's going to really screw up this equation. I'm pretty mean to myself, and I realize I actually do treat other people much better than I treat myself. Please.
There's a paraphrase of that, which is do unto others as you would have them do unto you. So that really takes the onus off of loving yourself. It's how would you want to be treated? That's how you would treat somebody else. That has nothing to do with actually loving yourself. You just know how you want to be treated.
brilliant point. There's a paraphrase, it's almost a kind of synonymous idea, but it's phrased differently that takes out the need for self-love, the prerequisite of self-love, the do unto others as you would have done unto yourself, because I won't consciously want to hurt myself. So I would like other people to treat me with respect and give me nice things, treat me equally, all of those things. And that phrase, I think you're right, that's easier to fulfill. But it makes me think, did the Torah do this deliberately? Love your neighbor as you love yourself is a prescription to say you must love yourself. It's actually harder because maybe humans have struggled all along with that. When you think of Moses, there were so many self-doubt moments, maybe even self-loathing. Ugh, who am I? Really? Am I the prophet to free the people? I feel small. I am scared of my own abilities. And I wouldn't say, oh, but that's self-loathing. We don't know. We haven't met the man. But there's still those hints that the humans in the Torah have an inner life. And Jacob certainly struggled with fear and had to have the angel wrestling with him, remind him, like, you do not need to be afraid. I've got you. And some people say that was just a dream. He just had to mentally calm down and find that inner strength. He had to learn to love himself, to believe in himself, to then move forward and confront his real external enemies. So, self-care is part of caring for others. They're actually much more intertwined. If you don't, because again, you can write it almost as a mathematical equation. If you don't care for yourself, it's actually harder to care for others, right? Because if we're just in no state to be able to give, then we actually negatively affect others around us. So therefore, self-care isn't selfish. It's actually helping those around you. And we're going to see that a little bit in more texts as well. But yeah, I think that is just very, very true. Let's see what our next slide is. So we get to but how do I take care of myself? And we've kind of mentioned this before, that it's not just in the physical realm, although obviously that's part of it. Wellness is holistic. I think that's like a very good word. It's absolutely everything that you possibly are. So what we can do is look at different aspects of your life. So all the dimensions of wellness would be social. Again, we talked about that when COVID hit us because of the isolation. Emotional. Again, if we received bad news, if we don't feel capable, if we feel overwhelmed, we're not going to be able to thrive. Obviously, physical is a dimension, but it's not the be-all and end-all. It is incredibly easy to feel good when you're not in pain, as we talked about. However, you can still be in pain. You can have physical ailments, but you can be well. You might not be healthy, and a doctor would say, this is a nightmare. Your chart, your numbers, this is a nightmare for me as a doctor. But you could feel well. Spiritual. Again, your relationship with whatever higher power you might believe in. You know, and I've seen this. Those crazy bonkers people who go to shacharit almost every day and wake up early and say their prayers. I'm looking at Ernie. It's the most beautiful thing, and it's crazy to me when you could choose watching TV, sleeping, going for a walk, getting your house cleaned. Many Jewish people and many people from any faith, because this is universal, by the way. This isn't just the Jews do this right. But most faiths have moments for prayer, for reflection, for connecting, which is almost physically counterintuitive. Especially a Shabbat morning service. You're standing still or sitting still for 3 hours, saying things in Hebrew. And yet, if you ask a lot of regular shul goers or people who do any kind of repeated meditation or spiritual practice, they feel a better sense of wellness. whether it's kind of achievement that they did this, or connection, or just I fulfilled my obligation. It helps them. It helps us. And again, it's part of this would be to encourage any of you to work out what would help you spiritually thrive. With absolutely no, here is what I think you need to do, because we are all so vastly different. And even again, within the massive range of Jewish practices, there are very different ways to accept that. And a lot of Jewish people go outside of Judaism as well as their Jewish practice. And something like yoga, for example, could be viewed as spiritual as well as physical, because often when there's the meditation part, you're asked to be intentional, to have gratitudes, to put good thoughts into the world, etc. Intellectual. We're all succeeding in being intellectually well right now. Let's give ourselves a round of applause. This isn't the most intellectual presentation I've ever given. This is more emotional, I think. But in general, every single person in this room has chosen to sign up for a Jewish adult learning course again and again and again. And you are therefore taking care and prioritizing your intellectual wellness. I hope you knew that. And if not, if there's anything you leave with today, because again, I can't judge what else you may or may not do in your life, but what I do know is we're meeting in this moment, learning together, growing together, and again, even if you're getting nothing out of right now, in general, the fact that you enrolled in MID when nobody forced you, maybe Susie's very persuasive, and maybe Rosalie as well, but you chose this. So you're making all these choices of how do I fulfill myself in all of these realms, you know? And again, environmental as well. I think a lot of us put effort into our homes, into a backyard, a front yard, into going somewhere, even if it's just every so often on holiday, whereby we can kind of connect to something physically beautiful. Even if it's just an orange tree, a blood orange tree, Susie Katz, that we are especially proud of, that gives us joy. But again, it's about external forces as well. And we can kind of feel like we're thriving. And some of this is very active. It's about like taking care of your environment, being invested in it. I've just explained everyone, I think. Did I miss anyone? Anything? And obviously social is community. Does anyone want to reflect or add to this? I've also got better definitions, but I think I probably covered it. Please, Lana.
You left out music. Music has an amazing power to lift your spirits, and I dare anyone to listen to Beethoven's Piano Concerto No. 1, third movement, and not feel excited and joyous and invigorated.
Yes, I love that. Yeah, I would say, because so Lana talked about a specific activity that gets her and many of us to a place of better wellness. And I would say that, these are more kind of abstract. You would slot music in to maybe intellectual and emotional as well. Because again, these are all different ways that we can get to kind of nurturing all the different aspects that we kind of show up in the world as. Zissel. Yeah, we love your voice.
You're
right at the back, my love.
just lazy. I didn't want to get up. Just wanted to point out that the interaction between body and mind, it was well known to the Romans. They coined the phrase mens sana in corpore sano, means a sound mind in a sound body. And that was, BC, when Rome was in its apogee? So the idea is very old and very true.
Amen to that, Zissel. You are absolutely right. This isn't new. The Romans especially would understand this. The Jewish people who lived amongst the Romans when they were really developing their philosophy of life and of the body and the mind and the intellect would have definitely been influenced. And we had many back and forth discussions between ancient cultures as to what is meaningful to us. How can we connect our mind, our body, what we do, and what is done to us to kind of emerge as like a whole, well, full human being. So again, just thank you so much for that spin on it. Again, I don't even know if we need to break these down because hopefully I kind of covered it. I wanted, because we've defined it. But again, the way that we're framing this is, all right, we get that we need to be physically as active as our bodies allow. We need to be emotional beings. We need to have nice lunches and play games and go out for a walk and and go to MID, But, what are we really aiming to do? And how does it actually affect our wellness? And what kind of values do we get there? So here we've got this idea that something physically, we get to a place of comfort and embodiment. Emotionally, we have the ability to accept our emotions. So it's not necessary, that was what I wanted, I think, especially to draw attention to, because that dates back, in my mind, to the sadness quote, that when we say emotional, wellness doesn't mean happiness. We can actually still have a sense of underlying well-being, even if we're grieving, even if we're sad. If we are real, if we're processing it, there can still be, and I've been there as well, I think many of us have, you kind of have an out-of-body experience. You watch yourself grieve and cry, and you kind of know, I'm doing what I need to do. I'm connected to my heart. I'm feeling this, I'm agonizing, but it's actually all love. It's love lost. It's pain, but I'm living, and I'm doing it, and I'm meant to be doing that. It's very weird, and again, sometimes you just feel like, no, I want this to go away, I'm languishing. But there's actually moments, even when you're in such pain, that if you're processing that emotion, and again, especially if you're maybe with other people as well, so you've got the community and you're journaling about it, or you're with a therapist, you're working on it, you're doing it right, and you can kind of be thriving on your grief journey. Do people get that? It's really nuanced. This is like the slightly less obvious stuff. Because emotional, your wellness goal isn't happiness or joy. It's nothing that's a positive emotion. And I thought, okay, great. So to achieve my emotional wellness, I need to be happy, good, and sunny. No, that's bullshit on October the 7th. In fact, you would be a psychopath if you were someone who was connected to the Jewish people, and on October 7th, you felt like pride, or if you were happy, you were actually, you weren't being well. You were being very unwell. You'd be sick if you felt that way. Yeah. You would understand. We aim for understanding. We aim for accepting our emotions as real and true and aware. If you're aware of your emotions, that's the thing. So to be emotionally well is to be aware of your emotions. So if you're angry, you're able to catch yourself and say, I am livid. I am angry at the world. I am angry at this person who just said a ridiculous thing. I'm angry at all of this. And so you're feeling anger, and you are actually emotionally well. Do you see that? It's actually really spicy, right? Or you could be happy. So we're not saying that you have to be in a negative place, but whatever your emotion is, if you are aware of it, if you are processing it, feeling it, embodying it, and you're not at the mercy of it. You know, if your anger doesn't then cause you to shoot someone, chas v'shalom, you are actually in a place of wellness. It's really weird. And again, like it's actually a way to live a healthier life. So, like I said, this isn't a kind of like everyone needs to be smiles and rainbows and butterflies. We have to be, and we get to be learners, growers, mature, and realists, because the world is real. And we don't deliberately go to the place of despair. And all of this is wonderful, and I'm going to end because it's now 10:54. And again, part 2, we're going to actually look at some sleep, some physical things, some other beautiful Jewish texts, but we'll just end on a little Talmud Bavli from Yoma, Tractate Yoma. And this is, again, hundreds and hundreds of years old, but I love this because having said all of that, you know, our intellectual pursuit, if you take on too much, you have taken on nothing. Which also means know your limits. Don't overexert yourself, because that will lead to being unwell and not thriving. So, want to just throw that out there. And like I said, hopefully you are interested in where this is going to go next. And thank you for thinking this through with me. And yeah, just hopefully you got something out of it. And I wish you all well. Have a break.
We know that when you're working, raising a family, and having a lot of activities, it's hard not to take on too much. Yes. And what you sacrifice is sleep. The beautiful part about retirement is you can prioritize things with sleep. But you have to suck it up when you're, and my kids, they're the same way. They have going in thousands of directions. But you will sometime. But you know what I tell everybody? Enjoy each phase of your life because you will never have an opportunity to go back. Huh?
Good morning, everyone. So we have lots and lots of people who are sick. Unfortunately, it's that time of the year and everything's going on. But I'm happy to be back. I'm sorry that I missed you the last couple of weeks. I had funerals and so today I want to go, let's see, I don't have black, so let's see if blue will work. Okay, there's Italy. There's Ukraine. There's Russia. Yes! And there is Moldova. So we're gonna talk about Moldova today, or Moldava, however you want to say it. Yes, it is. Was that the question was, Rabbi, is that a separate country? And the answer is yes. Oh, okay. So let me sit here so I don't get Susie's eyes at me. Sorry, Susie. Okay, because I know she's watching and she's laughing now. Okay, so the Lithuania is in there too. All the Baltics are right in that area. Yes. Yes. We're going to get to all these things. You are 100% correct. Your father is from? Yes, yes. Okay, so the country used to be known as Moldavia. It became Moldova in 1991 because it broke off and had its independence. All right, so the history of Jews there goes way, way back to the 1st century BCE, when this part of the world was a Roman territory in the Roman Empire. Jews lived in the province of what was then called Lower Moesia. This is that was part of the Roman Empire. So their history goes back a very, very long way. The 1st century BCE is before the year 1, right? Okay. Between the 4th and the 7th centuries, so let's think about that for a second. 4th and 7th centuries, that's 300 CE to 600 CE, approximately. The territory was part of a trade route between Asia and Europe. And it was bordering what was called the Khazar Khaganate. Khaganate basically means kingdom. Yes.
Was that trade route part of the Silk Road, or was it independent from it?
I think it was independent. I hadn't read that it was part of the Silk Road. And so if I say Khazar, that should like, hey, oh, wait a minute, wait, I know, what, Khazar?
This is what everybody is saying now, that Jews are fake Jews. They're really Khazars or whatever, however you say that. There's a whole thing on the internet.
Really? So the comment is that this is what we're hearing now all over the internet, that Jews are just fake Jews, that they're Khazars. Who were the Khazars? Yes.
That comes from the fact that one of the Khazar rulers became Jewish.
Ah, good. So the Khazars were a nomadic Turkish group, and they settled right in that area. And one of the most famous medieval books that we have, philosophical books, is called the Kuzari. You see it right there. And the Kuzari is a story, a book written by Judah Halevi, who was a Spanish philosopher, and it was written approximately 1140, in the year 1140. And what it said was, it was a story about the Khazar king, Bulan, B-U-L-A-N, who had a dream. And in his dream, he was told, your intention is desirable to the Creator, but not your deeds. So, the Khazar king then summoned 4 different theologians, religious people, plus 3 different religious people, plus a philosopher. A Christian theologian, a rabbi, a Muslim cleric, and a Greek philosopher. And basically he asked them, tell me about your religion, tell me about your philosophy. And in the end, he concludes that Judaism is the one true religion. And so what ends up happening is the Khazars convert to Judaism. An entire nation converts to Judaism. Khazars, they were pagans. Yeah. And, well, the computer puts it at the 8th century, but I find that a little difficult to believe, because if the Kuzari is written in 1100, I'm not sure, I think that date is a little bit suspect. But historically it's true, because there are no surviving manuscripts from the Khazar kingdom, so we don't know a lot about them, but we are told that they wrote in Hebrew script for their official documents. So, that book, once again, is called the Kuzari, and it's one of the most important pieces of medieval philosophy literature that we have. Now, I went over this in one class quite a bit earlier, but the Kuzari proposes a very, very, shall we say, problematic ideology under Judaism. Because when the rabbi speaks about it, he talks about, the lineage from Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and God and et cetera, and the conclusion of the Kuzari is that Jews are a superior people genetically. Their DNA, it makes them superior. So I brought this up when we were talking in our classes about being the chosen people, right? And how difficult it is for us to understand what that means, being the chosen people. Because that is what our tradition says. That is what God says. That is what he says. You're my chosen people. You're my treasured people. So the question is, in 2026, we can't walk down the street saying, nah, 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 I'm God's chosen person and you are not, right? We just can't do that. The argument for that idea is presented in the Kuzari. And it says Jews are born superior to others. And we can say, I'm like really not cool with that. On the other hand, you can look at the number of Nobel Peace Prize winners, Nobel laureates, Nobel winners in the fields of sciences, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And as a percentage of the general population, Jews are way overrepresented. I think that has more to do with the Jewish insistence on education. Survival of the fittest?
That's how I always look at it.
It's partly survival of the fittest. Those who knew to get out of a place that was dangerous or found some hiding place, they survived, and other people didn't. So, but also we have a tradition of education, and if you're teaching your kids from a very early age, they're going to be smarter than those that are not.
For me, I think the second part of that answer is the most correct one. Yes, Zisel. I would agree with Lana, but the tradition of education goes way back. Talmud. Even people who came to the United States did not have a formal education, made sure their children had education. Absolutely true. 100% true. I'm going to get to Bessarabi in a minute. You spent yesterday at a memorial for your cousin. He was a rocket scientist at JPL. And all the other scientists who came. And the number of Jews there were pretty much all of them. This is absolutely true. And Zisel is absolutely correct. It goes back, way back to a tradition of studying Talmud, where the males were taught from a very young age to read, to write, to study Talmud. When I was growing up, I never knew that college was an optional thing. That wasn't we never discussed that in my house. My dad was always, and when you go to college, you'll go to the best college you can go, I never knew that you didn't have to go to college. I thought that was a for sure thing. My first year at Stanford, I remember specifically, I was in the room, I was on the right-hand side, he was on the left-hand side. I was looking at him and saying, because he had told me, well, I wasn't sure I was going to go to college, and I looked at him, I said, what? You weren't sure if you were going to go to college? Don't you have to go to college? And he looked at me like I was out of my mind. I just had no idea until my first year of college that college was an optional thing. Because my dad, from day one, you're going to go to the best schools that you can go to, you're going to get the best grades, okay. a thought came into my mind, well, what about the Jewish women? They weren't educated like the men were.
And they were, they seem to be doing very, very well in our modern times.
They seem to be doing very, very well in our modern times. In our modern times is the most important part of that phrase. In older times, women had their roles in society. And you see that very much, like, for instance, in the Hasidim. In the Hasidic circles now, women understand their role as the matriarch of the family. They raised Jewish children in a Jewish household. And we've talked about this before, we could say as people in 2026, really, that sounds so repressive. That sounds terrible. The women can't up. And for them, this is the most important work they could be doing in the world. It's an honor for them to raise Jewish children in a Jewish household. So, in modern times, women have made their way, yes, into more educational circles. And now, thank God, we have some very brilliant women rabbis. We have women teachers all over the place because because the women have something very, very, very important to contribute. You are the exception. Your mother was an immigrant.
Well, my parents was divorced when I was very young. She didn't know about school. You're going to go to high school, because my sister, we went to high school, and you're going to be a secretary like your sister. This was all, when I was little, this was me growing up. And when I was in high school, I had a counselor who said, you're smart, you got the grades, you're going to college. And I said to him, I can't go to college. He said, yes, you can. You can go at night. I said, I've got to go to work. And that's what I did. It was only when I came to California and I got a job at Valley College and they offered their people working there, you can take a class in our time, but all you have to do is make up 1 hour and a half time. So from one unit, and I thought to go to college, you had to be bright. Now this is in a junior college. Well, when I got there, what an awakening I had, because there were kids who didn't want to be there, older people, and my very first class was the role of women in history. Wow. And I was on my way. I took that class, and from 0 units, from working full-time, going to school, their time, transferring to CSUN, from 0 units to my BA in communications, 7 years. And I'm very proud of myself. Because I had to prove it to me. I didn't prove it, to anyone else. I needed to go to college.
Well done, well done. Let me just say this, and then let's move on, because we got to talk about Moldova. We see this very clearly. Just as we have been alive, the 1950s were a time when the typical woman was in home as a homemaker. And it was not common for women in 1950 to be out working. That was the man's job. He was the provider. The women took care of the home. And just in this fairly short time until now, everything's changed. Everything's changed. Women can do mostly all the things men, I should say, are allowed to do. Of course, they can do anything they want, but they're allowed to do mostly anything that men can do. And we have a long way to go towards equality, but we've come a long way too. Okay, so we have the Jews were living in this area that is now Moldova. Now the question over here was, what about Bessarabia? Bessarabia was a larger region of which Moldova now comprises about 80% of what is termed the Bessarabian region. So you could talk about Bessarabian Jews. Most of those Jews lived in the territory that we now call Moldova, and some were in Romania, and some were in Ukraine, because Ukraine is just north of that. Before World War II, you can imagine the incidence of anti-Semitism rose, and during the 1930s and 1940s, there were pogroms and mass deportations. During the Holocaust, there were a total of about 45,000 to 60,000 Moldovan Jews, Jews who live in what is now Moldova, who were exterminated. And in total, the Bessarabian Jews, that entire territory, was closer to 280,000 or to 380,000, right in there. And they were exterminated by basically two ways. The Einsatzgruppen came in. Do we know that term, Einsatzgruppen? So the Einsatzgruppen were German soldiers who came in after the troops came in to basically clean up. And they were particularly vicious and particularly, the way Jews died from the Einsatzgruppen were absolutely horrific. They would they would have them dig mass graves, and they would line them up, and they would shoot them, and people would fall, and it was just, yeah, it's just so, it's beyond what we can talk about. It was so vicious. Or those Jews were sent to camps in what we call Transnistria. Transnistria is the dark blue area just at the eastern border of Moldova. And they went to two concentration camps. One was called Pecora, and the other was called Vapniarka. And those were two death camps located in Transnistria. Starting in, let's go back and just pick up some history here. So starting in 1800, okay, the year 1800, what does that bring up for you? We should know at least one big name from 1800. Napoleon, very good. Napoleon, 1800. There's another big name on the eastern side. So Napoleon was on the western side in France, right? On the eastern side, 1800 is Catherine the Great. She was a little before 1800, just a little. But 1800 is like, okay, I have a sense of when she was around. Catherine the Great is hugely important in terms of Jews. What does Catherine the Great do? Yes, very good. Yes, very good. Very good. You get a gold star. Catherine the Great establishes the Pale of Settlement. What was the Pale of Settlement? Good. Catherine, all the Jews on one side, Ken says. Basically, Catherine the Great said, no Jews in Russia proper. Not going to happen. You Jews have to confine yourselves to this area. Why did that happen? It happened because Catherine the Great annexed the eastern part of Poland, where so many Jews were living. In the same way that basically 135 years later, Hitler's going to go into Poland. He's going to annex Poland, and all of a sudden he's got massive amounts of Jews to deal with. Remember, before Hitler invades Poland, Hitler's plan was, let me make life so rough for them they're going to leave. Or let's ship them somewhere else, but let's make them want to leave. And then Hitler invades Poland. So many Jews were living in Poland, more than any other country in Europe. Why was that? Because they were welcomed into Poland. Absolutely, yes. Good. King Boleslav. Sorry, I got a little bit of something, but I'm feeling great. Poland had, earlier in history, welcomed Jews because Poland was on an agricultural economy. Western Europe had begun a mercantile economy. They were trading and selling things. And Poland wanted to do that too. And because the Jews kept books, they were, the nobles in Poland said, Jews, come this way. We're going to make life easy for you. And there was a mass migration of Jews to Poland after the expulsion as well. So, so Poland had the largest Jewish population of any country in Europe, which is why, unfortunately, most of the concentration camps were situated in Poland. All right, so in 1800, Catherine the Great says, I don't want Jews in Russia, and you can stay over there. And she establishes an area called the Pale of Settlement where Jews live. They can only live in that area. Now, we should also understand the Pale of Settlement wasn't only Jews. It was all kinds of other marginalized groups, gypsies, all kinds of other ethnic minorities, thank you, marginalized groups. And they all lived in the Pale of Settlement. So this is, the time of Fiddler on the Roof. And that's what we're watching when we see Fiddler on the Roof. Anatevka was a little village within the Pale of Settlement. All right, so Jews were confined to this area. The Pale of Settlement ceases to exist during and at the end of World War I, because the armies go through the Pale of Settlement and destroy it as they are conducting warfare. All right. When Catherine the Great dies, her son, Paul I, takes over. Paul I was not very well liked, and he was assassinated pretty quickly. When Paul I is assassinated, Catherine the Great's grandson, Paul's son, Alexander I, takes over. So Tsar Alexander I takes over, and he actually relaxes some rules for Jews. He allows Jews to come back east a little bit and engage in agriculture. So, if the Pale of Settlement is here, he allows Jews to come up just a little bit here, where there are lots of opportunities for agriculture. So he is seen as a very nice czar for the Jews. And then after Alexander I comes Nicholas I. This is not Nicholas and Alexandra. Nicholas and Alexander, that's Nicholas II. Nicholas I was pretty favorable for the Jews as well. He allowed them to move out a little bit and engage in trade and agriculture. So by the time we get to 1889, this is after favorable Tsar Alexander I and favorable Tsar Nicholas I, we have about 181,000 Jews in this area. That's a lot. By the time we get to 1897, we have 225,000 Jews. And by the time we get to 1903, we have the 225,000 in Moldova, and we have almost 2 million in Bessarabia, in the entire region. But 1903 then brings us to a very difficult place, the Kishinev pogrom. So Kishinev is the capital of Moldova. And the Kishinev pogrom, there were approximately 50 Jews who were slaughtered, which led to Theodor Herzl in Europe calling for the Uganda Plan. Anybody know about Herzl and the Uganda Plan? Somebody tell me. Good. Ken says all the Jews moved to Uganda. Very good. They were offered. Very good. So remember, so Theodor Herzl is usually considered kind of the father of Zionism, more or less, the biggest name anyway. And Theodor Herzl had proposed to the Zionist Congress, who were talking about, you know, we have to have a homeland, we have to, blah, blah. Herzl was an assimilated Jew. Herzl didn't really have a connection to the promised land, our promised land, what is now Israel, what is now Jerusalem. Theodor Herzl's idea was that, okay, we need a place that has boundaries around it that we can call a homeland and that we can be safe in. He wasn't thinking, well, you know, it has to be Jerusalem, it has to be Israel. He was just thinking a safe place that has already political boundaries around it where we can be safe. And so he went to the Zionist Congress after the Kishinev pogrom, and he said, okay, so, you know, what about Uganda? Because Uganda was I think, British territory at that time. And so he proposed Uganda as the Jewish homeland. And they all looked at him. they looked at him and said, what? What the F are you talking about? Uganda? Are you out of your mind? And very quickly, Herzl backed down. He kept his mouth shut, and he realized, okay, this wasn't a good idea. And he realized very quickly, if it wasn't, you know, Palestine, then it wasn't going to be anything. He learned very, very quickly. And so the Kishinev pogrom was a real, it was one of the first incidents, right? When in 1881, we had already had the assassination of Tsar Alexander II, which led to pogroms and violence, which led to many from Eastern Europe beginning to look for places to go, the United States and Israel. Israel, the beginning of the Aliyot, the first Aliyah, the second Aliyah, the third Aliyah, after the assassination of Tsar Alexander II, and also the United States. So you'll recall that in terms of immigration to the United States, the first wave had come from basically Germany, and they were educated, wealthy, assimilated Jews. And they came over and everything was fine. And then you had this huge wave of immigration to the United States, mostly through Ellis Island, but other places as well, right around the turn of the century, following the violence in Eastern Europe. And then you had all of these very poor, very uneducated Jews coming from Eastern Europe. And they came to New York's Lower East Side. And then you had a real tension between the wealthy German Jews who had already been here and established themselves and these poor, uneducated Eastern European Jews. And the wealthy German Jews looked on them as an embarrassment. And, you know, they did their folk ways and they had their superstitions, and the German Jews were like, what? No. That created a lot of tension. By 1920, we had about 267,000 Jews in Moldova, and by 1930, 270,000, which, as we talked about, was the number at the beginning of the Holocaust. And that was, and so many of them were sent off, and they died. After World War II, what we now call Moldova, which was the Moldavia under the Soviet system, became the Moldavian Soviet Socialistic Republic. And there were approximately 98,000 Jews there in 1970. In the 70s, we know that many immigrated to Israel, the US, Canada, Australia, Western Europe. So I can remember that what was the time period, I mean, we all remember this, with the Soviet Jews were having such a difficult time. 1979, 1980. So during the 70s, many emigrated, and then Russia really cracked down, and Jews couldn't get out, and it was a very difficult time. By 1989, so this is 19 years later, there were 65,000. So we went from 98,000, almost 100,000, down to 65,000 by 1989. In 2014, so fast forward by a lot, there were 15,000 Jews in Moldova, 10,000 of them living in Kishinev. So there certainly was a kind of rebuilding of the population. And there were 75,000 Jews, Moldovan Jews, in Israel that had emigrated. Luckily, by 2022, laws were passed. Discrimination against religion was banned, and it was illegal also to incite an ethnic hatred, and that was all made illegal in 2022. However, anti-Semitism was still there, unfortunately. Around the beginning of 1980, so your last name is Sternman, And your family is from Moldova. And you were working for the Federation, and they had funds set aside to educate Russian children in Judaism, but they didn't want it. When you were contacted by a cousin you never heard of, you flew to meet them in Columbus, Ohio. Your husband said to let's go and meet them. Right. So you finally met them and you brought them to Los Angeles, and they're still here. And in that group, how many PhDs? How many? 6. Wow. Eh. That's fantastic. Why were they so reluctant to learn Judaism? Yes. So I think we have to look at a couple of different things. So Jews who came from Russia were not allowed to practice Judaism, from Soviet Russia. We're not allowed to practice Judaism. I do many funerals for older Russian women. They were never given a Hebrew name. Most of them weren't even given a Yiddish name. And they know, and the Russian families who come to the services know absolutely nothing about Judaism. And it's not their fault. They weren't allowed. They were not allowed. They were prohibited from having any contact with Judaism. And so it's no surprise that the children grew up without any connection to Judaism. And you'll recall this was Nicholas I's plan as well. He was going to conscript Jewish children into the army for 25 years. They're going to be indoctrinated in Russian Orthodox Christianity. And by the time they reach 25, they will know nothing about Judaism. They will have no interest in it. And their communities from which they came will be devoid of young men. That was exactly what he wanted to do. Yeah. Yeah. And so the Jewish women then, what would they do? If they're going to marry, the only men available would be Gentile men, because all the young boys had been taken. All right. So anti-Semitism was still very commonplace. In a 2024 poll of 1,000 Moldovans, 923 of them answered to the question, well, how do you feel about Jews? And 923 said, kind of neutral. But when they went in further to get a more specific idea, 48% said they didn't like Jews, did not like Jews. 40% said they did like Jews. There is a chief rabbi, Pinchas Zaltzman, and in Kishinev, there is a Jewish kindergarten. There are 2 Jewish schools. There's 1 library. There's 1 cultural center. There are 7 synagogues, including Chabad, of course. And then there are 3 synagogues outside of Kishinev in other sort of large cities, but not large like Kishinev. Moldova established diplomatic relations with Israel in 1992 and there is an Israeli consulate in Kishinev. So I think the I think the future of Jews in Moldova looks pretty good. I mean, there is a thriving group there, 15,000. Okay, that's not huge at all, but it's not 8, right? So 15,000 Jews. There's a fairly vibrant community in Moldova. Obviously, they have Jewish cemeteries. They can get kosher food, as well as all the other things that traditional Jewish communities would need. I was not able to find out if all of those synagogues were traditional or not, or if they had something that was more like what we call Reform or Liberal Judaism. I didn't see anything on there. I don't think so. I don't think so.
I have a strange question.
You have a strange question.
We all know about the anti-Semitism, not allowing Jews to practice their religion. Why were the Soviets not allowing the Jews to leave? They should have kicked them out if that were the case. Why did they want to keep them?
Why were the Soviets keeping the Jews if they? Why didn't they just let them leave? Why were they not letting them out? Or why didn't they kick them out?
If they let the Jews out, other people would leave, and they couldn't have that. And a lot of the people that moved to Israel who were Russian are not Jewish.
That's true. Zisel? The Soviet Union did not want to lose a large number of people. Many were very well educated, and the loss of manpower and intellectual power the Soviets were not about to let them do. Yes, you would have a serious, what do we call it now, brain drain?
From the Nazis who got rid of them, and that's why they lost the war. They realized it.
The comment was they learned from the Nazis who got rid of them and lost the war. Except your point about some of the top scientists is accurate. They were Jewish, and some of the most important Jewish scientists were able to somehow get out and come to America, but that definitely factors in. You are right about that. Huh? Spain experienced a major brain drain. When are we talking about? Oh, during the Spanish expulsion in 1492. Yes. Zisel. I'd like to point out that a little bit earlier in the century, when different governments tried to place Jews everywhere, including Uganda, Stalin spoke up.
He says, I got space in Birobidzhan. Put the Jews in Birobidzhan and make that a Jewish state.
In where?
Birobidzhan.
Where's that?
It's in Russia.
Far East in Russia, there is a Jewish enclave.
Stalin said that he had space in a place to. Is this like Siberia?
Not really, but it's not
No,
those
it's not,
soldiers.
I don't
No, it's farther south from Siberia, but it's very sparsely populated.
Very far east.
Very far east. So Stalin said, I have the space, put him there. And make a Jewish state. Well, but I expect, that something like that would have been done for tax purposes. I mean, the more people you have, the more you can tax, the more money the government rakes in. But by that time, after the Uganda plan, there was no talk of other places for Jews. In terms of the Western idea, I shouldn't say Western, the Allies' idea of where Jews could go, then it became only Palestine. England and Germany especially had another plan. You'll recall that it was called the Madagascar Plan. And Hitler, before he invades Poland, he says, okay, well, we got a lot of Jews. Why don't we just ship them all to Madagascar? And there were two reasons. Number one, Madagascar is a big island, but still, it wasn't big enough to hold all the population of Jews. That wasn't, and Great Britain controlled the seas at that point in the war. And so there was no way that Germany could move that many people across the ocean to Madagascar. So the Madagascar plan fell apart. The Uganda plan fell apart. And from then on, it was only talk about Palestine. That was the only place that could be a homeland. What about South Africa? What about it? In the 1920s, a large group of Lithuanian Jews went to South Africa. When you went to your cousin's memorial, all the scientists and engineers who were there were all first generation. And what? First generation and Jewish. Yes, so that's wonderful. As far as I know of, there was never any plan to make South Africa a homeland. But there is a large, in fact, and we should do South Africa. Maybe I'll do that next week. South Africa has a very large Jewish population in certain places, yeah. Particularly Johannesburg, yes. In fact, I think we might have talked about it at some point when I got back from South Africa. Johannesburg and Cape Town, probably, yeah. Alaska? Not that I have ever heard of. There was a book about it? Say again? There is a Jewish museum in Alaska. Okay, well, we definitely have to do Alaska then. Yes. I read something disturbing recently.
That Israel held in South Africa Israel aided.
Yes, that is true. That is true. The question was that during apartheid, that Israel aided the whites in South Africa. That is true. They did. They did make an alliance with them. Yep, they did. Sometimes you have to make alliances with what did you say? With Israel did not have many friends, so sometimes you have to make alliances wherever you can find them. Right.
That's why South Africa is like so anti-Israel at this
Oh, interesting. Okay, one more question and then I gotta let you go. Yes, Cecil.
Remind everybody that necessity makes strange bedfellows.
Yes, okay. Cecil echoes Lana's point, necessity makes strange bedfellows. You have to do sometimes what you have to do. All right, everybody, have a beautiful week. Nice to see you all again.
The other one was, I went to Fairfax High in its heyday, and it was 99% Jewish. And it was 99 percentile on the Iowa test. I felt I was Jewish, but I only got a 25. That's how I felt. So I grew up thinking.
Yeah, here's the map of where it is. See, it's right near China. Yeah.
So when I was going to Fairfax, I thought Jews were smarter than everybody else because they were top 99 percentile. There has to be something there. I don't know what the reason for it was, but.
Take care of yourself. All right, have a great week. It's good to see you again. I haven't seen you since early December. I know. We went off and then you had other people to take care of. Huh?
I just have to tell you, my grandmother, my father's name, his mom wouldn't let him join the Boy Scouts here because he was born in Pittsburgh because of what had happened with the crucifixion of Jewish. So she felt like that
Everybody
was
else yells
sad
out, give us a
thing,
here.
yeah. So, it is too bad, but, you know, he did okay.
I know that. But guess what? That's very true. I understand that because I also like to give. Sometimes you need to receive. Huh? No person is an island unto themselves. Huh? I know that. How are you? Good. Okay, now you can get my check-in session. I have to say.
But it's just for rain.
It doesn't matter, I have a VIP, so I can get a break 365 days a year.
Well, I thought that maybe others in your class might be interested.
Even if they were, what would that?
Maybe someone else has had some flowers.
You can ask before next class and just say, I haven't had any luck tracking you down. Does anybody have any other ideas about what to do?
That's a good suggestion.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Have a good week.